by the end of the day, and Annabelle will be a vegetarian. I think she's a vegetarian. Thank you.
All right, let's get started. So welcome to you all here tonight, and thank you for coming. It's great to see you all here. We're going to make sure that we finish at 7:30 in order to be away, get you home, and also we can catch Sussan on the kitchen cabinet tonight as well. But I'm sure you've got record devices on your. You'd be surprised. So I'd first like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, elders past, present and future. On the land on which we meet is the Gadigal land, and it's great to see everybody gathered here tonight to talk about the very important issue of education and care. I'd like to welcome Senator Sarah Hanson-Young, Green Senator for South Australia and spokesperson for early childhood education and care. The Honourable Sussan Lee, MP, Federal Member for Farrer, Shadow Minister for Employment, Participation, Childcare and Early Childhood Learning, and the Honourable Kate Ellis, MP, Federal Member for Adelaide and Minister for Early Childhood, Childcare and Youth and Women's Participation as well in the workforce. No, we were told not to kind of add that in, but I think it's a very important one. That's the thing with these portfolios, you always get heaps of them. Yeah. There's plenty there. So thank you very much for being here, it's great. And I'd also like to introduce our panel members, Sam Page from ECA, Chris Legg from KU Children's Services, and Tony Goddard, an advocate and consultant, long time in the early childhood sector, and a life member of Community Childcare, which we love, and she's on her badge. My name's Leanne Gibbs and I'm CEO of Community Childcare. So I've done all that. I'm also supposed to tell you about the bop-bops and the whoop-whoops if we've got some sort of fire, but I think if we all just stay calm and listen to the instructions from people in this room who are generally able to give instructions, then we'll be right. I want to tell you a little bit about the format for this evening. We'll begin, I'll ask each representative to speak for 15 to 20 minutes. We're beginning with Senator Hanson-Young and going this way. We will then have a response and questions from our sector panel, and they are each representing the voice of children, the voice of the provider and the voice of the sector, and we'll then open up the opportunity for questions from the floor. So before we start, let's have a quick review. I think this is really a room full of optimists. We're full of resilience, and why wouldn't we be? Over the past few years we've had great news and great initiatives. A set of groundbreaking reforms that make a difference to children and even make a difference to the economy. We've got a bit of action down in the live web. Sorry, one thing I did forget to say is that we're live streaming, and we've even got a web chat room which is live, and you can hear it if you listen carefully right now. And then if you're tweeting, there's the hashtag as well. Okay. So, bit of a distraction there. We've had money injected into the sector that promises great things to come, but there also seems to be a world of challenges. We live in two worlds at times, a world of great promise, and then we've got undersupply of places, questionable flow of funds, state underspends and reviews that seem to redefine words efficiencies and equity so that they apparently mean the same thing. We've also got a fantastic set of reforms that mean better outcomes for children, but they still require persistent advocacy to reach their full potential. And apparently the world of education and care is becoming purely a marketplace, and all the men and women merely consumers. It's difficult to get the rights of children into the conversation. In 2011, our Governor-General said, as a society we must place children at the centre of our attention. We must value their uniqueness and worth as individuals and citizens, and we must champion parents, carers and teachers in their vital roles. Alert to the special challenges of social, economic and Indigenous disadvantage. We must ensure that all Australian children have access to services that nurture positive development. This support and the continued engagement by parents, families and extended circles of care will provide young people with a strong, stable foundation for learning and maturing. So that should actually be enough, really, because it is amazing. But apparently we need more. So if it's not enough to be convinced of our role and our social responsibility, then what about James Heckman's work? In the world of economics, James Heckman earned a Nobel Prize for demonstrating the economic sense of investment in early education. He showed how early childhood predicts future education, health and social outcomes, and furthermore, he has shown just how much more effective early intervention is than later remediation. One study showed a 10-fold return on investment spent on 0 to 3-year-olds, and that's just the most amazing return. As he said, I think now we spend probably too much in the later years fixing things that we could fix much more cheaply in the early years, and I think that you will all agree with that. So, our esteemed elected reps, this world of early childhood education and care is none other than a blue chip investment. It's definitely a buy recommendation. Investing in children's future is really a blue chip investment, and one that by definition has a national reputation for quality, reliability and the ability to operate profitably in good times and bad. It returns an investment, and this investment is significant. It's better than the automobile industry. It's better than mining, strangely, and it's really the one to invest in. But we really need to do more in order to make sure that it reaches its full potential. And here are a few things that we think every party should sign up to. Delivering on the objectives of the National Quality Framework to enable all children to benefit from the internationally recognised value of early childhood education and care for growth and development. And to that end, we've got a wonderful election pledge here, which we'd encourage you to sign tonight, to say that you're committed to the reforms in full and that you're not interested in them being wound back or delayed. If you'd also like to go to your elected representatives and ask them to sign this pledge during the either lead up to the election or the election, then we'd ask you to do that. And when you do, let us know that you've done that. Now, we've got some community childcare staff who will put their hands up. There they are. And they're wearing purple t-shirts, and they've got these election pledges that they're happy to give to you. It's a one-off only tonight on this beautiful big poster for you, but you can take it to your elected reps. The next is that we'd like significant funding of workforce measures to ensure education and care services can recruit and retain a highly skilled professional workforce. And we kind of want to know what's going to happen to the early years quality fund at the end of 2 years. We'd also like action to ensure early childhood education and care remains affordable, especially for socially and economically vulnerable families. So what does an affordable and accessible sector look like to you? We're interested in that. No one disagrees that every child is deserving of opportunity, a quality early childhood education and the chance to have a bright and fulfilling future. Why does it seem so hard to deliver? It seems to be just an argument about who pays. So now, it's over to you. So I'd like to invite, first of all, Senator Sarah Hanson-Young to address us. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you. Thanks, Leanne. I really appreciate that. I'd like to firstly acknowledge everybody who's come tonight. I think this is a great forum and a wonderful opportunity for us to be talking about an issue that I think should be front and centre at this election. And I think in some areas it will be, and in other places perhaps some other topics will end up creeping onto the front pages of the newspapers, and yet the investment in education of our youngest children will tend to be pushed onto the later pages in the back of the newspaper, and I think it's all of our responsibilities to make sure that doesn't happen. I'd like to acknowledge my co-speakers here tonight, the Minister Kate Ellis and the Shadow Minister Sussan Lay. Great to be on the panel here with you. Sam Page, Chris Legg, Tonya Goodhart, thank you very much for inviting me tonight. I really appreciate it. Now, it is one of these issues that when we talk about investing in early childhood education and care, and Leanne's gone through some of this already, you know, it is, when you look at the raw figures, it just makes absolute sense for us to be making sure we invest early and we invest hard, because it is the dividends that pay off for, as you all know, as people who work in this sector, to make sure we give our children the best start at life right from the beginning. We all know the statistics that the 0 to 5 age group is crucial for development and giving kids the best start in life. And yet it's often overlooked how important this investment is. And often because it can't be quantified in just an annual budget statement or even an election cycle. It's long-term investment that really counts here. I believe that early education and care should be viewed not just as an essential investment in our next generation, but obviously an essential service for Australian families as well. And we know that with the quality reforms that, and I give kudos here to the current government, they implemented the reforms, they established them, and I think it's important that we all see them through. We actually need to fund them. If we're going to see them be able to be successful into the future, we've got to make sure we fund the implementation properly. And I've said this before, that you don't institute a major reform without bankrolling it properly. And it staggers me, to be honest, that 3 years on, 4 years on, we still haven't seen that proper investment of public dollars to ensure that the reforms work well and are going to be there for the long term. So that's what we really need to see being put on the table this election, I believe. And yes, that means there's going to have to be decisions about things that won't be funded, or revenue having to be raised from other places. But if we're serious about investing in early childhood education and care, then we have to fund the quality reforms that we all know we desperately need. And not just, I believe, as the sector, for your own security, to understand that these are things that you're investing your own time in, your own training in, but that the government of the day will be there by your side working to that investment as well. Earlier this year I met with Professor Pia Brito from Yale, and she was talking very clearly about the investment returns from early education and care. And I was struck by the statistic that has been quantified by economists right around the world, that for every dollar that we invest in early childhood education and care, the return can be as high as 17. Now, I don't know any other investment that is that significant, but it does take long-term thinking in order to be able to visualise that that's the type of vision, that's the type of leadership we really need. Obviously, we're all going to be here tonight. We're going to take some questions, I know, from the panel and hopefully from you as an audience as well. We've got to be finding ways that we can fund the quality reforms. We've got to work out the steps that we need to make sure that the sector who are working so hard to meet those benchmarks can get there. One of the policies that the Greens have put forward is in relation to helping teachers upgrade their skills and ensuring that we have a help fee waiver program, so that we know we need to get more 4-year trained workers, and that means we have to be giving people incentives to stay in the sector as well. And it strikes me every time I go and visit a childcare centre how many workers will come up to me and say, you know, I have to do this for the love, because I'm not doing it for the money. I have to be doing this for the kids and the what I get back out of this and what I believe I'm giving to those children, because I could go down the road and work at a school and get paid better. And probably in some ways the conditions across the board in terms of hours would be better as well. We have to heed that advice that we're getting directly from the ground and make sure we respond. So one of the things that we've put on the table is the idea of a help fee waiver, which would mean for students who are upgrading their skills and becoming qualified teachers, we would waive their university fees if they stay in the sector. So linking it directly to the results that we want to see, which is retaining qualified workers in centres. In relation to the payment and the childcare benefit payment and the childcare rebate. I've been listening to you in the sector, hearing that it's time that we actually made this much more simple. Let's roll the rebate and the benefit into one payment. Let's fund centres directly so that we can actually get a sense for centres in particular and workers, how much money you're going to have to be able to provide the spaces that you know you need. Ensure that parents aren't caught out of pocket every fortnight or every month having to pay the fees. If it is money worth spending because the government has budgeted for it, let's put it directly to the centres and make sure we can fund it in the most practical and effective way. So streamlining the benefit is also something that we really should get going and should see more of. I must say, since the last election, it has been good to see the rebate be able to be paid more frequently, and I know that's helped a lot of parents out there, and I know it's been easier on centres to be able to not have to be waiting and giving almost grace periods all the time for families who are struggling to be able to catch up with that cash flow. But let's just fund you directly, and then there wouldn't be a problem in the long run. Of course, we can't just roll those payments together and think that that's going to pay for the gap in terms of the increase of cost of matching and meeting the quality frameworks. We've obviously got to be seeing more money going directly into it, and I think that's something that we really need to see more priority from both the government and the opposition to do that. You can't just expect parents and centres to shoulder all the burden of increased cost because of the quality framework. And if we want the quality framework to work, if we want to see it sustained, then we have to fund it properly. We've also announced some proposals in relation to capital grants funding, because I know that spaces are obviously a problem in some places, and being able to upgrade the facilities. If you're a non-profit centre, if you're a community-based centre, you're already struggling to be able to balance the books, let alone expand or upgrade infrastructure. Having a capital grants fund available where you could apply for money to do the expansion or create the new centre that you need or just upgrade the facilities would go a long way to making sure you can keep fee levels at the rate that you know families can meet. The availability rates here in Sydney, obviously, you know, they are extremely problematic. We did a survey earlier this year, and Sydney's vacancy rates were the worst in the country. And in some ways, you think, well, that's great because families are wanting to use your services. And obviously, community-based centres and not-for-profit centres always had the highest rates of occupancy and the lowest rates of availability. I think that really says a lot about the relationship that your families have with your centres, because it's about knowing that when you drop your child off at a childcare centre, that they're safe, they're being loved, they're being cared for, they're being educated, and you develop a relationship with that family at the centre. And it doesn't surprise me at all that the strength of support for non-profit and community-based centres is the strongest amongst families, Australian families, because you can tell when you walk in whether that relationship between the families and the centre staff is a strong bond or not. And I know that with that comes all the extra work that as staff and as educators that you put into making sure families feel secure in that relationship with you and their children. I think it's one of the saddest things that we see at the moment, that we have an entire debate about education in this country. We've just seen the Gonski reforms debated over the last 12 months, and we saw huge amounts of money put on the table and invested or earmarked to be invested into schools. And I think that is fantastic. I'm sad to see it being cut from our universities, in order to fund that investment in schools. But what I'm most dismayed about is that we haven't seen the same type of debate for money to be put into the early childhood education and care sector. And what are we thinking? How do we think kids are going to make it in grade 9 if we didn't invest in them at the age of 3 or 4? We've got to be making sure we invest from early childhood right through to university years, and we've got to get it right then. I've got a 6-year-old, and she's now in grade 1, and before she went to school, she could read. And I tell you what, I'm a really busy person, so it wasn't just me putting in that time with her. It was the carers that she has and has had from the young age of about 12 months, working and investing in her. And because she can read, she's now streaming through grade 1. And I know there's other kids in her class. She goes to a small public school in Adelaide, and there's other kids in her class who will never be able to match where she is at now, because they weren't at that same pace when they entered, and they didn't have that same investment. And it saddens me that we are seeing children, not just in the suburbs, but particularly in rural and regional and remote areas, we're seeing children fall through the gap because the services are not able to be funded to meet their needs. And in those more remote areas in particular, the gap of being able to fund properly in order to deliver those services can't just come from those local communities. It's got to come from strong investment from government. I'm really looking forward to taking some more questions. That's a very broad brush of where we're coming from, but I think I've hopefully undeniably put on the record my commitment and the Greens' commitment to the quality frameworks, but we have to make sure we fund it properly. I don't want to see the hard work of this sector fall over in a year's time or 3 years' time, or whenever it is that the government of the day decides to not fund it anymore. We have to see it through. We deserve it, our children deserve it, our workers deserve it, and our families deserve it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was wonderful. Right, next I would like to invite Sussan Lee to the podium to address you. Sussan is the Federal Member for Farrer, Shadow Minister for Employment, Participation, Childcare and Early Childhood Learning.
Thank you very much indeed, Leanne, to you and your team and our distinguished panel, to my colleagues, Sarah and Kate, both very strong advocates for all of you, as you know, and to so many friends in the room. It's lovely to be here. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we stand, and was reminded of a visit to a centre in the Blue Mountains at the end of last week, where they have the Nagroo Aboriginal initiative, which brings Indigenous education into mainstream centres, and I was just so impressed. Some of you will be aware of Nagroo because it's Sydney based, but spreading across much of my electorate, which goes to the far west of New South Wales, to some of the most disadvantaged Indigenous communities. And I mention that because I think we do need to keep in mind the disadvantaged and the possible need for them, or the absolute need for them, to have different standards, levels and more care wrapped around them in the early years. So I think that's something that we would all absolutely agree on. I want to talk briefly about how I've found the sector since becoming the Shadow Minister, and I often say there's not very many benefits of being in opposition, but one of them is that you can start with a clean slate, and I have. And I would have visited 200 centres possibly in the last year. Victoria, who travels with me, will probably tell you it's a lot more, and had about 70 roundtables in the last 6 months in every state and territory and type of community across Australia, and it has been an enormous privilege. And every single centre is different, and every single centre does something that I've never seen anywhere else. So it's an exciting job to have, and I would love the opportunity to continue it. And my pitch here is not that, but to talk to you about what we as a coalition would like to offer and how we view the sector at the moment. I noticed that the pledge talks about the doubt that you appear to have about obviously the Coalition's commitment to the National Quality Framework, and I want to assure everybody in this room that we are committed to the National Quality Framework, that even if the Federal Minister in the Coalition had the power to tear it up with the stroke of a pen, and they don't because it's legislated by each state and territory, we wouldn't. I am committed to the National Quality Framework. I appreciate and completely approve of the need for smaller ratios and higher qualifications, and I absolutely love the early years learning framework, and Sarah talked about it, the importance of her daughter arriving at school able to read and write, and I would also reflect on the importance of the early years learning framework in building resilience in children, not necessarily academic ability. Colours and numbers are vital, of course, when you start the pathway through school, but the resilience that you learn in the early years that can last you a lifetime and that you may not find in your home environment is something that, by talking to Professor Frank Oberklade and others who've studied and have a great evidence base on the early years, I absolutely get. So again, an area of agreement. What we want to do, if we are elected, is look at how the National Quality Framework is working in every centre, most particularly how accessibility and affordability are working both for the providers of childcare and the consumers. And again, the most important consumer of all, and Sarah, I agree with you, is the child, because that person doesn't really have a say in this room, but they are the most important client in any situation involving early learning and early education. But when I hear of centres that are struggling under the burden of paperwork, not every centre is. When I hear of centres that are unable to be flexible with some of the rigorous rules that surround the National Quality Framework, and it's different in every state. I think it's a bit bizarre that you can be a centre in New South Wales that only ever gets rated as working towards because you don't have sufficient number of early childhood teachers. But if you pick that centre up and put it in Queensland, where the NQF has been legislated differently, it can be an excellent centre. I find that a bit bizarre. I find it unusual that family daycare coordination units, and I was in southern Tasmania last week, and family daycare is huge in Tassie because of the regional nature of the landscape. Some have been rated in some states as excellent with 5 children. They're going to, as many of you know, 4 children next year, and they can't be rated as excellent because they have to. The change ratios would mean that such a rating couldn't possibly transpose. And again, I'm not disagreeing with the need for that change ratio, but as one family daycare educator said to me, well, I've got to look at my parents and say, which one of you is not coming back next year? Which child do I toss out the door? And what she said to me was, I don't mind the changed ratio either. I'm happy to eventually go to 4, but can we have some way of transitioning and grandfathering this child so that she's been in my care all the time? She's starting school in a few months. Why can't she stay another 3 months? I thought that was sensible. These are the types of common sense, sensible approaches that I think we can take. I know when Early Childhood Australia came to see me at one stage, they talked about not being sure whether we need both a certified and a nominated supervisor. Is that necessary? Perhaps it's not. I noticed that a CEQA has in its list of qualifications, I think, and there'll be some experts here who can correct me if I'm wrong, actually now included some 3-year degrees in the early childhood degree that you can be approved of being an ECT with. They do a fantastic 3-year degree at Charles Sturt University, but it doesn't at this stage tick the box for being an ECT. So, but it seems to be recognised that unless we try to do something around that, we're just not going to have the numbers of qualifieds in the country. I was talking to a forum at lunchtime today of operators, both community and public, and much talk was made of the need to bring people on 457 visas, and in my role as employment participation, the request was made, well, could we please put childcare educators on the list of skilled occupations? And I said, well, I just kind of can't help thinking that's a cop-out. I'd really like those quality people to come from Australia first. I can look at every young person in regional Australia in my own electorate without a job or a pathway out of school and say, well, this is a good pathway for you if the training's there, if the if the traineeship's there, if the funding's there, if the support is there. I don't want people to just say we can't find this particular qualified person because we absolutely have to have them on a certain date. and we therefore have to bring them from overseas. And I know that that might only be a temporary arrangement, but I would worry that it might become a little bit too permanent. So when it comes to providing the numbers of people with the qualifications that you all know you need in the sector, maybe we just need to have to relax some of those timelines a bit. I'm not happy with what I heard in regional New South Wales recently from a centre director who went to a meeting of many centre directors who was told by the New South Wales Department, you will all be operating under a waiver. Don't worry about it, it's okay. We know that you've got no hope of getting the early childhood teachers into these tiny little towns. We'll let you operate under a waiver. Of course, you can't then have a rating above working towards, and I think that's a slap in the face for the hard-working educators who put their heart and soul into everything they do. And I've seen it in every centre I've visited. I have seen it and I have taken it in, and it is a message I absolutely get. But, why can't that centre ever lift off the bottom just because they can't find an early childhood teacher to come to their area? Ultimately, yes, it's what we need. Ultimately, it would be great to get there. Ultimately, I'm optimistic that we will, and lots of things need to happen to change that. But in the meantime, we've got to make sure that we don't punish centres and we don't punish parents with price rises who then move into backyard care arrangements. Now, I know I'm accused of scaremongering, and I don't want to do that. And I know parents will always do their best. But I have just been overwhelmed by the numbers of au pairs who've been contacting me to say they're coming into the country and they're working in people's homes because they've just no ability to source the childcare they need, particularly in areas of Sydney where places are so hard to get. And, we want a regulated sector. We don't want sectors operating outside the framework that everyone's worked so hard to do. But we have to recognise that that framework is straining at the edges. And there are aspects of it that we can bring some changes to bear to actually ease the squeeze, both on the cost increase in parents and the pressures that centres are under. And, consistency is important in early learning, as you all know, particularly for the child, to have consistency of educator in the centre, for the centre itself to be happy and respond well, to have a good team environment, that's important too. So if we have anything that ends up causing staff turnover, we have to be careful about that. And if we have centres that are closing or struggling or under strain, or as I often see, the mum and dad centres that end up in a sort of corporate framework because the single small business operated by just two people, just can't cut it with the pressures that the sector is facing, including excess regulation, price rises, and parents who are saying, I'm going to have to look for an alternative because I can't afford this. When I hear centres say, look, I haven't even factored in the price rise that'll go up in the toddler room, I don't even want to think about that, I'm just dealing with what I've got at the moment. Or I'm not going to have 0 to 2s because, it's not possible for me to finance the 0 to 2 room. It's easier to close that room. And so the pressures and the spaces and the call for the 0 to 2 age group in Sydney is just getting more and more. So please don't think that the Coalition doesn't like the National Quality Framework, doesn't like the work that you're doing, doesn't believe in the strength and the passion and the commitment of your centre, of your educators and your professions. I want to touch on the Early Years Quality Fund because I see quite a few Big Steps representatives in the room, and obviously I've met them on many occasions as I've travelled the country. I'm not looking at my watch, I'm just making sure I don't go over time, and there's a lot of people in here and I think they'd like a chance to talk. We saw the Early Years Quality Fund pass through the Parliament at the last sitting week. So it's been legislated. There's been an appropriation, as you know, of $300 million that's now available. The guidelines have been released and people are applying for the funds. I consider it a divisive and unfortunate piece of public policy by the government, but that's not because I don't think that early childhood educators are underpaid. I do. But what I said to United Voice, and I don't know if we've got any United Voice reps in the room, I expect we have, and I've always said to them from day one, is please lodge your claim through the Fair Work Commission. Do it now, get it underway so that we can secure permanent long-term price rises, wage rises for your sector, if indeed that's what the Fair Work Commission determines. And I see that United Voice has now lodged that wage claim, so that is a good thing for you as the workforce, because that will put you on a sustainable footing for the future if that gets through. It won't do what this has done, which is divide the sector between those who might receive the pay rise and those who might not, and I know 40% has been the figure that's been quoted, but a lot of people have told me that it's probably around 27%. When I asked the minister's staff and the department for a briefing, they certainly didn't tell me it was 40%, and they acknowledged it could well be around the high 20s, and in fact no one knew because at that stage the guidelines hadn't been released. I don't think it's fair to be that divisive. If we come to government and the fund hasn't been sent to whoever or divided up, and I suspect that it's moving pretty fast, so it probably will, my disposition would be to simply share it around the workforce equally and not put centres under the added cost of writing the EBAs and going through that process and possibly not securing the funds. The information around the fund has been very poor, and the expectations have been built, I think, too high, because one thing that the department didn't even tell me was how much the increase would be in various sectors, even though the published amount for Certificate 3s, I think, was $3 an hour. I think that's pretty well been acknowledged, but at the time that I consulted, it was, well, we don't know. I think that put a very unfair burden on centre operators and on a group of educators who deserved better. The wage claim's now been lodged, and if somebody would say, well, what do you think early childhood educators should pay? I would say it's not the role of government to determine what anyone should be paid. That's why we have a strong quasi-judiciary body in the Fair Work Commission, and that's their job, and it will go through that process completely independent from politicians, as it absolutely should. I'm just thinking of other matters that I can talk about. I want to touch on, because Sarah's mentioned the rebate, and I expect Kate will as well. The rebate, as you know, was frozen by this government, capped at $7,500. That is putting additional strain on families, and a lot of families talk to me about maxing out the rebate with 2 children by, say, the 9-month, period of a 12-month period. And the other thing, of course, I hear about the rebate is centres who say that they would like the rebate put to them. When we had the Senate estimates, last round of Senate estimates in Canberra, I asked one of our senators to ask the department whether a centre could make the policy that you pay the rebate directly to the centre and it doesn't go to the parent, and the answer was yes. So I would certainly encourage every centre operator to actually have that as a policy on their books, because it is ridiculous that rebates that correctly belong with a centre don't get paid directly to the centre. The other aspect of our policy around early childhood learning is our Productivity Commission inquiry, which has generally had a good reception from every sector, even people who wouldn't normally agree with each other. Now, I know that people say, oh gosh, here we go, it's just another review. I strongly refute that. We've got to remember that the National Disability Insurance Scheme that we all support came out of a Productivity Commission inquiry. What the Productivity Commission does is give, a serious economic underpinning to a new public policy, and means that it gets absolutely thrashed out, its effect, the modelling for the money, where you put it in, what happens to families, who's affected, in what proportion, what happens to children, economic, social, and it's all in there. It would be great if the Productivity Commission could finish this inquiry in 6 months, because we've got work to do. And the reason we need it is, I think the policy settings around childcare belong maybe even to 3 generations ago, but certainly they don't belong to today, where families' work-life balance is just so different. And I visited the childcare centre not far from here in the World Square Tower, to hear of children who are on the steps at 7 a.m. having done the long commute in from the outer suburbs of Sydney, and then are there till 6 p.m. to do the long commute home, and that's no fun. That's no fun for families, that's no work-life balance. So we need to look at alternatives to the traditional model so we can suit shift workers and people who simply don't have a 9-to-5 job. Now, I know people say, look, this coalition, they just want to be able to pay the childcare rebate to nannies. Not so. The issue of in-home care is one of the terms of reference in our Productivity Commission inquiry, and we need to consider that. Would we be paying the childcare rebate to someone who unstacks her dishwasher and does the family washing and puts the tea on? No way. And if I was to be asked how would that play out, I would think, well, if you were a long daycare centre, you've gone through National Quality Framework, you absolutely understand the regulation, you have the quality assurance, you could, for example, have the in-home carer attached to your centre that could be part of a long daycare centre care and also part of some in-home care. That's just me talking. This is not something that's going to turn up in a policy document, but it's something that I would ask the Productivity Commission to look at. the PORSE model of care in New Zealand, which empowers disadvantaged women to run a business from home, to become educated themselves, to then also have other children. So it's a type of family daycare with training provided, is fantastic. I've actually put that in the terms of reference too, and we have specifically added a term of reference around disadvantaged children. I've been to Heidelberg in Melbourne and been extremely impressed by, and I can't think of their name, Society for the Prevention of Children, I know what they used to be called, and the work that they've been done, which has been very supported by state and federal governments. And I think there's room for us to find something in our policy that does, as I said at the beginning, specifically address that cohort of children. So thank you for having me. Look forward to questions. Probably something I've missed, but delighted to pick it up in the questions and discussions. Thank you, Leanne.
Thanks very much, Susan. So we'll move right along because I know there'll be a lot of questions after we've had our panel session. So I'd like to welcome the Honourable Kate Ellis, the Minister for Early Childhood, Childcare and Youth, to address you now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Leanne, and can I thank all of you. I'm at the distinct disadvantage of having had you all sit there for 45 minutes listening to people talk to you before I begin. So I will try and keep my remarks as brief as I possibly can, although I have so much that I do want to talk to you about, so that we get a chance to get many questions in. Before I do that, can I begin by also first acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet and paying my respects to elders past and present. I want to acknowledge, of course, Leanne Gibbs and all of those who have worked so hard to put on this forum once again. Also my fellow speakers in the Shadow Minister, Sussan and Senator for South Australia, Sarah Hanson-Young. We should really do these in Adelaide.
We should.
It'd be very helpful.
Next time.
There you go, next time. But most particularly, can I take a moment to acknowledge all of the hard-working early childhood professionals who join with us in the room tonight. This is a great opportunity for us to say thank you for the hard work that you do each and every day, and I really believe for the huge amounts of progress since the last time we met in a forum like this pre-election. I am incredibly proud of the reforms that we have worked on together. And to let you in on a little secret, she says, surrounded by cameras and mobile phones, but I was having a conversation last week with one of my ministerial colleagues and friends who was talking about a project that she had introduced some years ago. And I said, is that your baby? Is that the project that really means something to you? And she said, yeah, it is. And she said, Kate, what's yours? And I said, well, there's been a huge amount of highlights, being a federal minister for almost 6 years now. We delivered huge increases, record increases in sports funding. We've done some amazing things in terms of disability employment and employment services. But my baby is absolutely the reforms that we've made to the early childhood sector. I just think that we have come such an incredibly long way in a relatively short amount of time. And I'm really conscious of the fact that that could never have happened and never have happened successfully if it wasn't for you out there in the centres, on the ground, working hard to make it happen each and every day. So I want to take the opportunity to say thank you for that. And I just want to start with one key fact. I was sitting there listening to the other speakers, and I was mindful of the fact that I don't want to fill my 15 minutes rebutting and playing negative politics and arguing about little bits and pieces that have been said. But there is one key fact that I want to start by pointing out. We heard Leanne talk about early childhood should be a blue chip investment. Sarah indicated that parents and centres shouldn't be burdened with the costs of the NQF alone. Let's just start with one key fact. Over the next 4 years, the Australian